one of the first tunes I learned on the fiddle was the Star of the County Down, but I learned it as an instrumental. I learned that tune and always loved the melody to it. It's very much in my head. I could lilt it for you right now if you wanted, but we'll save that for later. After the shots of whiskey have come out, then I will sing the County Star of the County Down without the words, just lilting the melody. So the melody was very much in my memory. And I can't remember where exactly, but I would guess that it was somewhere around Galway town that I was at a session where somebody sang the Star of the County Down, the first time that I had heard it, long before Van Morrison or the Pogues or any of the other people who have recorded it. It was the first time I heard the lyrics. And I listened intently because I knew the melody. Within two measures, I knew what the melody was and where it was going, and that there would be a break in the song, which was wonderful because everybody knew it and we all joined in with great gusto. But anyway, I asked a friend of mine, as I had a habit of asking these little nagging American questions, what is the Star of the County Down? And he said, well, the star in general is the most beautiful woman in the town. And the star can change from day to day, okay? Because it can be somebody who's come into town, like your Telluride experience. That woman maybe didn't live in Telluride. You maybe never found out, or maybe you did. All the power to you, Mike. But anyway, so I had a clue, and I would hear the reference, not just in musical terms or in musical situations, but somebody would say, she's the star. And they didn't mean like a Hollywood star. They just meant the shining, the bright star that shone in the sky. That was the star of Dublin, or the star of Galway, or the star of Ennis, or anywhere, the star of Telluride.
Yeah. It sounded like a Marshall beat to me, like.
That's right. That's right.
And I wanted to groove for me, so I could dance around here to it. You know what I mean?
In addition to the star in Ireland is the rose. Just a little detail that might not have anything to do with your video or not.
Sounds like a new song to write.
It sounds like a new song to write, but there was a very famous festival in County Kerry called the Rose of Tralee Festival, and I've been to it once. And so that was the rose. So those two concepts in Ireland, the rose and the star, relate really to the same thing. And it's an estimation of beauty in the mind of the beholder.
Well, also probably 1,000 songs written about the rose as well as maybe not.
Oh gosh, you can go on from traditional stuff to vaudeville stuff, and the rose comes up probably more than the star. That after having played the Star of the County Down as an instrumental in many sessions in Ireland, over there they call them sessions, and they're music sessions. They're not jam sessions like we have here. People know the tunes, and if they don't know the tune, they sit it out, or they're quick enough with their ear to pick it up very silently the first time around, a little more robust the second time around, the third time around, they know the tune. And those are the brilliant players. Those are the ones that I would seek out. They had the ear for the music.
I wanted to ask about was a cool story you told me about was explaining when you went to the sessions, how you would start in the back and the main session players would be in the front and they'd have their main circle, and then they'd call you up forward as they got comfortable with your playing or they appreciated something you were doing. How did maybe just walk me through what it was like to be in one of those sessions?
Well, the one I remember the most of that sense was the session I frequented the most. And after I had come back from Ireland the first time and got my grandfather's fiddle. My grandfather had a fiddle, although he played more French Canadian type stuff. He had a fiddle, so I strung it up. And started learning tunes and learned a handful of tunes and went up to Boston and a fellow by the name of Seamus Conley who was from the same town as my grandmother was from, and with the same spelling of the last name. So eventually we determined we probably were related to each other. Okay, but when I first went up there, it was not that people treated me rudely, but because I had not been there before, I was excluded from the rings, the concentric rings that came out with Seamus Conley sitting in the middle. He was like the conductor, the music conductor of this whole, and right around him were a ring of very, very good players who were his students, taken directly from him, and maybe even the next ring had a bit of students, a bit of good players. I was like the fifth ring out. And again, I played, I don't know, maybe one or two tunes, but I had my trusty tape recorder with me, so I taped a few sets of tunes. And in those situations like that, they play two or three tunes linked back to back in a row. They'll go from one key to another key to another key.
Like Scarlet Fire for a Grateful Dead show. They have certain...
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, it's the same.
Match, they blend into each other nicely, and they kind of go together.
That's right. They might go from a major key to a relative minor, back to the major fourth, and then back to even to the major again. And but anyway, I learned that set of tunes, and I learned another set, and I learned another set. And eventually, Seamus came up and talked to me. And he said, well, I know you're learning our sets of tunes. I can hear you out there playing way out in the borderlands. Yep. And so he invited me when there was an opening in one of the more inner circles. He invited me to sit there. And that was a great, the people around me were like, oh, it's nice to meet you. Yeah. You've just gotten the blessing of the high pope of Irish music in Boston. And Boston was a good scene, I have to say, of course. Like Chicago and New York, San Francisco, good scenes. And so I continued to work my way up in the rings of that session. And the closer I got to Seamus in the circle, the more I heard his playing rather than everybody else making a hodgepodge of it. And the sort of the satisfaction of it was a few years after that, I was playing in a traditional Irish band, and we were playing a gig in Boston, and it was a gig that Seamus was playing fiddle for some step dancers. And we went on first and played, and then he played, and then he came up to me after, and he said, I remember you from the sessions a few years ago. He said, I just want to thank you for bringing Irish music the way you young guys are bringing it. With we were playing the bouzoukies, and we were playing the harpsichord type keyboard that was popular at that time in Irish music, and mandolins. And he said, I think it's great stuff that you're making it more acceptable to younger, we were all in our 20s at that point, or early 30s. I was in my 30s. And, but he was just so generous. And that's the way, in general, that is. None of us were born in Ireland. We all had some Irish connection, but none of us were born. We were at least second generation. My friend Eddie was second. We were in the second, third generation. But we were, I was going back to Ireland. I was feeding my band, not my band, but the band I was in, with music. I'd go back to Ireland for a month, collect a whole bunch of tunes, come back. So we were learning tunes that were being played in Ireland and playing them in America within a month or two of my going back and forth across the pond. And they never paid me for that, Mike. Think of that. They should have given me the big bucks. Yeah. So anyway, that's what you get for liking.
That's what you get for liking microtones.
Yeah, that's right.
Jazz players might commiserate with you.
That's right. Well, I had that influence. But let me tell you another circle story that concerns a very well-known to some fellow by the name of Tony Furtado, who is just a fabulous slide guitar player, singer, just fabulous, but also an amazing banjo player. So I was playing in a session in Boulder, and there were two or three of us who were running the session. And it was the same idea. The inner ring would be the people who really worked on the tunes. The next ring, people who were pretty good. And the next ring, people who were learning. So we're playing away, and I see a guy take out a banjo. a dreaded banjo. In Irish music, the banjo is usually a 4-string plectrum that plays the melody. In bluegrass, it plays more of a kind of rhythm, spotty melody kind of thing. And I may be chastised by my bluegrass friends who love Bella Fleck. By the way, Bella Fleck also recorded The Star of the County Down.
I haven't heard his version. I've got to check it out.
Yeah, but anyway, so I hear this guy playing the banjo, and he's nice enough not to barge into the middle, which would have happened, and I would have to play the heavy and say, no, you're back there for a while. So the banjo player's back there, and at first I'm trying to ignore it because I figure he's not playing anything like we're playing. But then I begin to pick up on it, and I realize he's playing note for note some of the tunes we're playing.
Nice.
So I look over at him and give him a wave a finger, and he moves in. Somebody had vacated a seat, probably to go up and get a drink. And again, we launch into a set of tunes, and he's playing note for note. And I'm like, wow, who is this guy? And I pull him in so he's sitting right beside me. And we played until finally they closed the bar down and threw us out at 2 o'clock in the morning. And it was just so amazing to have somebody who I didn't know at all, who played an instrument that's generally not associated with Irish music. But he's one of the few of those banjo players, Bella Fleck being another. So I suspect his version of The Star of the County Down is very much right on the traditional Irish. He knew how to wait, how to move the timing. It's not done on 8th notes and 16th notes all the time. And this guy, Tony Furtado, did the same thing. So we got together a number of times. He came into a number of sessions and he learned a number of tunes. And I was just listening to a Pandora station, and an instrumental set of Irish tunes came on that he played. And one of the tunes in that set was one of the tunes that we used to play. And I just loved the way he played it. And so he's a bona fide, in my book, he's a bona fide honorary traditional Irish music player. Even though his music spans, I think he would say it's probably Americana, because he can play bluegrass and old-timey and folky. I just heard him do, what was it? Maybe Gentle on My Mind, the old John Hartford tune. Some tune that's, no, If I Had a Boat by Lyle Lovett. Yep. He played an amazing version of it with guitar, slide guitar, dobro, and banjo. And I imagine he multi-tracked it, but absolutely beautiful version of it. It stopped me in my tracks. I wanted to pull over the side of the road and just stop my vehicle and listen to it. It was so beautiful. So that's just how that whole system works. If you don't know the tunes, you don't sit in the inner circle. It's not a jam. It's not, oh yeah, I can play in the key of D. Just let me loose. I'll play in the key of D.
Noodle over your
let me noodle over your intricate, detailed little stuff. And it wasn't that we were the best players, but we knew what we were doing. And so anyway, that's the circles, the concentric. So when I would go to Ireland, I would wait for the invitation. I would always sit on the back and I would play my best. And somebody might say, sure, move up here. This is, the other players would recognize where you were.
Yes.
And they would make room for you. The chairs would move. You'd find yourself in another inner circle, or headed towards the inner circle. There were times I played with guys that I was listening to on recordings. I mean, talk about an amazing thing. Imagine if you could sit down with, or at the time, sit down with, say Anders Osborne, and just be in a session with Anders Osborne. You've learned 20 Anders Osborne tunes, and you're going to play along with Anders. That feeling.
As my buddy said, it would be like the on-ramp at the Indy 500.
Right. Yeah, there you
Must
go.
have felt like that.
Yeah.
Those guys? What were some of the names of those guys you were talking about?
Oh, Tommy Peoples, Sean Keane, Patty, Donald Lunny, Patty Keenan. There were a bunch of luminaries that you could sit in that were still doing session work. Now, it's unfortunate that a lot of those guys now don't do as many sessions. They do private sessions with all the level of players that they are. And I see that even down in, although there's a well-known there's a well-known festival in La Veta, Colorado, probably a lot of people don't know, called the International Celtic Festival. And they always bring in the hot shots of the Celtic festival of the Celtic fiddling world. And those players will they'll walk into a session of even novice players. Now, it may end up that everybody stops playing and this person plays the rest of the 2 hours. But in general, they will try to fit in because, of course, they're trying to encourage players. But most of those guys are pretty hard-nosed. That it doesn't go like this, it goes like this. And they would show you, and it could be the tiniest, where people, after 10 times, are saying, I don't hear what I'm doing different from what you're hearing. But to the ear that knows, you're hearing the difference. And it may be timing, maybe a certain ornament. It could be the tiniest detail, but they're going to back everybody up and say, okay, here's the way this is done. Here's the way you should be doing it. And to me, that's great. I love that. And to me, that's what keeps traditional music contemporary, a true oxymoron in a way. But traditional music is very easy to make contemporary. I'd be willing to bet many songwriters, Bob Dylan for sure, borrowed those melodies from the Gaelic countries where music was a big deal. It's not a coincidence that we have our Appalachian music and our old-timey music, and it all traces its roots back to the Celts and the Gaelic countries. The music for them was the highest art. Music was the highest art form. And the fact that you were able to tap into that and bring it into the contemporary scene is, to me, what makes traditional music wonderful. I would say fiddle tunes have been the biggest source of melodic ideas for me because I learned hundreds of them. And that's what you do. Johnny Doherty had 1,000 tunes committed to memory. 1,000. I mean, think of what 50 tunes is, or even 100. I might have had a repertoire of, I don't know, maybe 100 songs, 100 tunes, 100 instrumental fiddle tunes. But when you run across someone who has 1,000 tunes, then their brain is thinking melody all the time. And those tunes are different enough. The Irish had a wonderful habit of borrowing music from France, the gavottes, the dance tunes of France. They borrowed from the Balkan music. They borrowed from Polish, Hungarian, Northern European music, and they made it their own. And so their mind was filled with melody that way. And I think as a songwriter, just as a little aside, and I imagine you'd agree with me, the more melodic content you have to draw from, the more versatile and inventive your melodies of songs can be. Okay, now these are not jazz pieces with lots of accidentals and odd sounding things. They're in the wheelhouse of any listener, just as pretty much bluegrass is. A couple of accidentals, a couple of blue notes, and old-timey music, and even our Americana music, you know, groups like Mandolin Orange, Elephant Revival, they're tapping into that melodic tradition and writing contemporary songs. So you can't say the tradition got stopped in 1960. It didn't. It blossomed and it overwhelmed to the point that river dance, people like Lorena McKenna became very, very popular worldwide, drawing on those same melodies. So I digress a little bit from the Star of Telluride, but you asked me, so I'm going to tell you.
No,
that's how it is.
Well, a melody that's that compelling needs to last. And
absolutely.
And you know, the first time I heard it, I came to it because I was trying to impress you because of your knowledge with Irish music. I thought, because you like it, there's got to be something good in there that I need to dive in, not to mention my background half of it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
And so I knew that there was some good gems in there. So I started digging, and I thought my gateway drug would be Van Morrison and the Chieftains when I came across that album. I don't know where I stumbled upon it, but anyway. And I'll confess, a lot of it was beyond me. But that song hit me like a thunderbolt, like the Star of Telluride did. You know, all of the bands that you mentioned, they're doing the same thing. They're bringing in those traditional, and that's why those melodies have lasted so long. They just get put on they put on different clothes and go to the next generation.
Absolutely, and never did I hear a disparaging word with someone taking a melody that had been around for 100 years, 200 years, and putting words to it. It was never, I never heard anyone say, you're messing with the tradition too much. Even the old players, the old guys, loved to hear a new twist to the old tale. And I think that is what's going to keep, it invigorates music. Any type of music that draws from a melody structure, all that music is fair game. And I will tell you from learning the tunes that I learned, there are thousands of those melodies. O'Neill's Book of Ireland is 1,200 different jigs and reels and marches and airs, 1,200. And that people look at that and say, well, that's just like scratching the surface. I would go, even after I had played for 20 years and learned hundreds of tunes, I would go to sessions in Ireland. And again, they call them sessions. You're going to the session tonight? Yeah. And I would sit there for 2 hours and not recognize one song, not recognize one instrumental piece of music, because the players playing them, and it might have been a group of players, were from a different section of Ireland, a small town in Ireland where they had their set of traditional tunes. And that was very, very common, that you would go in to a town, a small town, where you'd see that I might be hitchhiking or walking, and I would see that there would be a session tonight at such and such a pub. So I'd hang around for the day, looking for the star, no doubt. And then I would go to the session at night. And seriously, there were times when I would have my pint of Guinness set up and my fiddle all ready to go, my bow rosin, and they would start into a tune, and I'd say, never heard that before. Then the next tune would come along, never heard that before. And then finally someone would say, you yank, play us a tune. And I would be all excited, because I would be able to play a tune that I knew, So it was great fun. They call it crack over there, and it's not the drug. Crack over there means fun. So when someone says, we had a great crack, it's great fun. We had a really good time.
Those regional differences, I hope they persist. And it reminds me of what they always talk about, the musicians down in New Orleans and the different wards and the different neighborhoods, how they have different takes on the same tunes. I mean, you kind of recognize it, but there's a certain local nuance to it that makes it their own.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right with that. And you hope it does last. But and it's funny because it's cyclical. A fellow by the name of Michael Coleman recorded in the 30s, a very famous fiddle player, moved to New York, recorded. Everybody wanted to play like Michael Coleman. The records went back to Ireland, and everybody in Ireland threw their regional music out and learned all the Coleman style. And unfortunately, it changed what people in Donegal were playing uniquely, or Sligo, or over in Belfast. It changed that because everybody started playing like Michael Coleman. That was the goal. The goal was to play like Michael Coleman. But after that peaked, people realized that the regional differences were very important. That a Sligo fiddler, Michael Coleman was from Sligo, so they would sound like Michael Coleman. But right next door in Donegal, they would sound more Scottish influence, because a lot of Donegal people went to Scotland, learned the Scottish tunes, brought them back, made them a little more Irishy at times, and they had their own repertoire of tunes. And I remember talking to an old fiddle player by the name of Bobby Casey, who's very famous in Ireland even today, but he's dead. Bobby's dead. And he was talking to a group of us about tape recorders. He was saying, you're so fortunate. You have these devices that will record note for note what people are playing, and then you can go home and you can learn them. He said, when I was a kid, I'd take my bicycle and my fiddle, strap it on the handlebars, and I would ride out 10 miles or 15 miles. And I would learn tunes from those people 15 miles away as best as I could. You know, play it again, play it again, play it again. He'd pick a particular tune and he'd kind of get it down, and then he'd bring it back. He was in a town called Milltown, Boulder, west coast of Ireland. And he would bring it back and he would play his version. And then it would be known as the Malbay or the Milltown Malbay version of that tune that he learned from someone 10 miles away. And when they came from 10 miles away to him, they'd say, that's not the way it goes. It goes like this. So he was a very entertaining man who had been an entertainer literally all his life. When he was 12, he started playing for weddings. Those were the paying gigs in Ireland, because nobody paid money to hear Irish music in Ireland. Nobody paid money for that. Nobody made money off of that. And so he would play these weddings, and he would make some money and teach the occasional fiddle lesson to somebody passing through, some Yank who wanted to learn how to play the fiddle, which was me. And so he was a professional musician till the day he died. And I have to give him credit, because he was playing at a time when people were not making money. I remember, as a little tidbit, I remember when Matt Malloy, who plays in the Chieftains, the group that backed up Van Morrison for the Star of County Down, he was working at Shannon Airport as a bag check, because he couldn't make enough money playing music in Ireland. Now, the Chieftains have become very famous. He's making his money. He's got a pub called Malloy's in Westport that I would highly recommend anybody go to if they hear this. Wonderful traditional music. So anyway, congratulations to you for writing a contemporary traditional piece of music that is simply outstanding.
Thank you.
And if that tune makes it across the big pond, as they say, to Ireland, you're going to have a #1 hit on your hands. You're going to be like the Bruce Springsteen of Ireland, you know.
Either that or I'll get a travel ban put on me. They won't want me in the
I doubt that. They have, like I said earlier, they have a wonderful capacity to absorb the changes. Now, it's not always the case. The ornaments of Ireland are very specific on the instrumental tunes and even on the vocals. Just another aside, I had mentioned to you the movie called The Song of Granite, about Ohini, which I would, again, highly recommend. But he sings in a very distinctive old style of singing, where his voice is making tiny pitch modulations that are just astounding as to where he finds spaces in between the notes that we thought were the notes. He finds the little microtones in between, almost like a sitar finds those microtones. And that movie moved me very much, because it reminded me that the connection to this music goes back probably the earliest to people singing.
Sure.
People singing, but instrumental melody. He was singing the sound of the river. At one point, someone says, well, where do you get your inspiration from? He says, it's the sound of the river. And one scene in the movie, towards the end, they play this brook, babbling brook, the typical babbling brook. And you listen to the sound and you realize that the rocks that it's going over are making pitch modulations in the sound of the river. And it struck me like your thunderbolt, that was the origin of those singing styles. It was the birds. There's a very famous tune, instrumental, called The Lark in the Morning. And at one point, the instrument is supposed to resemble the lark, the sound of the bird, the lark. And it's beautiful. The flute players and the whistle players, I'd play it on whistle and attempt to get that sound of the lark. And it was always great fun because it's in there. And so, you know, this one song you have, the Star of Telluride, you probably could really trace that back into the depths of time. I made a trip to Ireland back in the 70s when Ireland was still old Ireland, or a good part of it. And kind of to check out my roots. My grandmother was born in County Clare. So I found myself with a month in Ireland, and mostly on the west coast of Ireland, County Clare, County Galway, up to Donegal. And just kind of bumming around, hitchhiking, walking. And of course, that wasn't the only tune I learned. I continued to go back to Ireland probably about every other year and spend a month. I had relatives there, spent some time with them, and they were all very Irish in their music styles. My uncle Frank Kane played traditional fiddle. He would, when I'd stay with them, they would have sessions that would go on for hours. And about midnight, Winnie would bring out the ham and cheese sandwiches with a lot of mustard on it, and the bottle of whiskey would come out. So it was very traditional. So from them, I learned a lot of tunes, and got a real sense of the Irish connection to my family that I didn't realize. And that Irish connection really was a particular sense of humor that they had and a particular gift for storytelling. My father could engage a waiter or a waitress at a restaurant for 15 or 20 minutes, telling them stories that had nothing to do with Ireland. He had the gift of the gab, the Irish gift of the gab. And so it was interesting to connect that. It really reminded me of my Uncle Eddie, who always wore his tweed Irish cap when I was a kid, and sang. He was a cook in a relatively famous little boxcar, basically up in Providence, Rhode Island, and they sang four-part harmony while they were cooking up the eggs and bacon in the morning. And as I got further into Ireland, I knew that the music was also a very dominant part of the culture, especially on the west coast of Ireland. I was hearing this wonderful music, which sounded a little like bluegrass and Appalachian, which I was familiar with, but I understood these were the roots. This is where it was coming from. So I, after that month, I came back and with a burning desire to learn the Irish fiddle. Specifically the Irish fiddle, not bluegrass, not old-timey, but specifically Irish. It took me so much by storm. I was going to say this is fun for us to talk music because we're almost always talking music, Mike, so it's not the first. And I was just getting warmed up, buddy.
The apprenticeship, when I first started taking lessons from you, and thank you so much for all the gifts that you've given me and setting me on this journey, Jim. It's immeasurable, the contributions that you've made to my life. So thank you.
Well, it's been a pleasure in my life too, Mike. So
thank you. And more to come, hopefully, for both of us.
Yeah.
Many years to come. But in the meantime, when I first started working with you, you told me the story about how in Ireland, it's 7 years listening, 7 years practicing, and 7 years playing, and then you're a musician. Maybe you could expound on that a hair, because I thought it was cool.
You have it exactly right. You have it exactly right. 7 years of listening, and that's listening, to the traditional music you're attempting that, or you're thinking you're going to play. Now, for most of the kids, certainly in earlier times in Ireland, that was very easy because that was the only music around them. They were hearing what they would be playing. But the 7 years of listening, I felt that I didn't really start to play the fiddle until I had listened for at least 7 years and began to hear the inner workings of the tune. That's right. Then 7 years of practicing also includes going to sessions, practicing your tunes, but going to sessions. And then the 7 years of playing would then be pretty much those guys at that point, 21 years old, are just playing. They may learn a tune, but they wouldn't call it practicing. They're just playing a tune in. So I thought that was for most musicians, and I don't tell everyone that when they come in for lessons. I don't say, "Go
run
for the
exit." Thank you so much, Jim, for so much. We could do this all day, and here's to the next 21 years together. Thanks, buddy, and here's to the.
Slasha.
mountainside in Telluride one evening last July. From the pouring rain came a sweet Colleen, and she smiled as she passed me by. She looked so sweet from her two bare feet to the sheen of her chestnut hair. Such a gorgeous elf, I shook myself to see if I was really there. From Halleck's Bay to Yosemite.